She held up a black pet collar and told 60 guests my 5-week-old newborn should learn her place. The gold bell jingled. They saw an outsider. I saw a threat. What does a soldier do when her daughter is attacked? My mother-in-law slid an eviction notice across the birthday cake and told my son to read it out loud. He was 6. He could barely read cursive. The room went quiet. 40 relatives watched. My husband said nothing. Grandma Ruth, my son said slowly. What does vacate mean? Ruth smiled at me over her wine glass. It means it's time to go home, sweetheart. Not this home, your real one. I kept my hands folded on my lap. 3 years ago, Ruth signed the deed to this house over to my husband, Caleb, as a gift. She never told him the fine print. I read it the same week. Every clause, every trigger. I am a title attorney. I read contracts for a living. Ruth thought I filed paperwork at a law firm's front desk. This house belongs to the family, Ruth announced to the table, not outsiders who married into it. Caleb finally spoke. Mom, this isn't the place. It's exactly the place. Ruth cut him off. Everyone should know the truth. She has 30 days. My son looked at me, confused. Cake frosting on his chin. I smiled at him first, then I looked at Ruth. You gave Caleb this house free and clear, I said calmly. No reversion clause, no conditions. Ruth's smile thinned. There's a clause. There isn't, I said. I read the deed the day you signed it. Her fork clinked against her plate. You had no right. I had every right. I said. I'm his wife, and a lawyer. Laughter died around the table. Ruth's sister-in-law suddenly found her napkin fascinating. You're bluffing, Ruth said. Quieter now. I reached into my bag and set a folded document beside the cake. Not the deed. Something else. What is that? Caleb asked. Something I found last month, I said. When I was helping your mother with her estate planning. Ruth's face changed color. Ruth asked me to review some paperwork, I told the table. As a favor, because she trusts lawyers when it's convenient. Stop talking, Ruth said sharply. She's been moving money, I said, out of the family trust, into accounts your father doesn't know about. Caleb's father, silent until now, set down his fork. What did you say? The room tilted toward Ruth like a held breath. Ruth, I said gently, would you like to explain it, or should I? She stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. This is a family matter, she snapped. Not something you get to announce over a birthday cake. You announced an eviction over a birthday cake, I reminded her. I'm just following your lead. My son tugged my sleeve. Mommy, is Grandma in trouble? I looked at Ruth. Really looked at her. The woman who handed my son a legal document like a party favor and called it a lesson in his place. Not yet, I told him. But she's about to be. Ruth's husband stood slowly, staring at her. Ruth, the account in Sarasota. Is it real? Ruth said nothing. Her silence answered for her. I slid the folded document toward my father-in-law. There's more, I said. A lot more. I didn't want to bring it here, but she made me. He opened it with shaking hands. His face went white. Ruth, he said, voice breaking. Whose name is on this? Ruth's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The doorbell rang. Every head in the room turned toward the hallway. That's not on the guest list, someone whispered. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, because I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that door, and Ruth had no idea he was coming. I'd called him 9 days earlier, sitting in my parked Honda Pilot outside a Meridian Trust branch on Route 9, my hands still cold from what a bank compliance officer had just told me. I hadn't planned to call him. I barely knew him. But when you spend 6 years in the Army learning that the person who saw the pattern before you is the person you radio first, you don't overthink it. You just make the call. Nathan Hale, he'd answered, wary, like he already regretted picking up. You don't know me well, I said. I'm Marin, Caleb's wife. A long pause. I know who you are. I found something, I said, about your mother, about an account. I think it might be connected to something that happened to you a long time ago. The silence on the line went on so long, I thought he'd hung up. Which account? He finally said. Not a question, a demand. That was the moment I understood Ruth hadn't invented anything new with us. She'd run this play before, on her own son, 8 years before I ever sat at that dinner table. So when the doorbell rang mid-eviction notice, mid-cake, mid-humiliation, I already knew. Nathan had asked me to text him the party's start time just in case. I hadn't expected him to actually come, but some part of me, the part that used to plan convoy routes and always packed a second radio, had hoped he would. Caleb's mother went the color of the tablecloth when Nathan walked into the dining room, holding a manila folder against his chest like a shield. Mom, he said, just that. One word, and 8 years of silence collapsed into it. Ruth's hand found the back of a chair. You weren't invited. I invited myself, Nathan said. Marin called me last week, said you'd been moving money again. Again, my father-in-law repeated. He looked at his son like a man trying to translate a language he used to know. Nathan, what do you mean, again? Nathan set the folder on the table, next to the cake, next to the eviction notice his mother had handed a 6-year-old 20 minutes earlier. Dad, he said, in 2016, Mom told me my portion of Grandpa's trust had already been distributed. She said I'd spent it, that I'd asked for an early withdrawal for a business that failed. I never asked for a withdrawal. I never never got a dime. I fought her on it for 2 years and she told everyone I was unstable, that I had a substance problem. None of it was true. I left. Because it was easier than proving a negative to a room full of people who'd already decided I was the problem. My father-in-law's hands were shaking now, both of them, the folder trembling between them. "Why didn't you come to me?" he said. "Because you believed her," Nathan said. "Not cruel, just tired. Bone tired. The way a person sounds after carrying something alone for a very long time. You always believed her." I watched Ruth's face do something I hadn't seen it do all night. It wasn't anger. It was arithmetic. She was counting the exits. "This is a private family matter," she said, but her voice had lost its music. "I'd like everyone to go home." "No," I said. Everyone looked at me. "You made this a public matter," I said. "The moment you handed my son a legal notice at his own birthday party in front of 40 people. You don't get to reverse that now because it's inconvenient for you." I should back up because none of this happened by accident, and viral moments never do. Somebody always builds the room before the walls fall down. I served 6 years in the Army, 3 as a combat medic in a forward support company, 3 more as a legal specialist in the JAG Corps after I got hurt and reclassed. I went to law school on the GI Bill. People assume law school teaches you to argue. It doesn't, not really. It teaches you to read. The Army taught me to argue. Specifically, it taught me that panic is a choice, and that the person who stays calm long enough to find the paper trail is the person who wins. I became a title attorney because I liked the quiet certainty of deeds and liens, records that don't lie even when people do. Ruth found this out about me exactly once, and she filed it away as unimportant. She thought title attorney meant paralegal. She thought I did filing. She never once asked what a chain of title actually was, and I never corrected her, because there is a very specific pleasure in being underestimated by someone who is about to need you. It started 5 weeks before the birthday party, on a Tuesday evening in March. Ruth called me, not Caleb, me, and asked if I'd look over some papers for her. "Attorney to almost daughter," she'd said, laughing at her own phrase. She wanted a second opinion on some estate documents before she took them to her real lawyer. I said sure. I always say sure to Ruth. It's easier than the alternative. She dropped off a thin stack in a manila envelope. A durable power of attorney granting Ruth authority over Gerald's financial and medical decisions, signed 6 months earlier. A trust amendment. Some account statements with the numbers cut off at the edges, like she'd photocopied them in a hurry and hadn't noticed. I almost didn't look closely. I want to be honest about that. I was tired. Eli had strep that week. I had 4 closings stacked on my calendar, and I told myself I'd skim it and give her a friendly thumbs up so she'd feel important and leave me alone. Then I saw the signature. Gerald Hale had signed thousands of documents in his life. He'd run a small HVAC supply company for 30 years. The kind of man whose signature was a fast, confident scrawl, same every time. Like a fingerprint. I'd seen it on birthday cards. I'd seen it on the deed to this very house. The signature on the power of attorney was slower, careful. The letters sat a little too evenly on the line, like someone concentrating hard on staying inside them. I told myself it was nothing. People's handwriting changes. He was 71. Maybe his hand was tired that day. Maybe he'd had a drink. Maybe a dozen boring explanations. Then I looked at the date. The power of attorney was dated the same week Gerald had been hospitalized for what the family had called a dizzy spell. I remembered because I'd sent flowers. Nobody had mentioned a POA being signed in the middle of a hospital stay. Nobody had mentioned it at all. My stomach dropped the way it does on a bad step, that half second where your body knows before your brain catches up. I called the hospital's records department the next morning, as Gerald's daughter-in-law, which got me exactly nowhere, HIPAA being HIPAA. But I didn't need his chart. I needed something simpler. I called Meridian Trust, where the Hale family had banked for 20 years, told the branch manager I was Gerald's daughter-in-law and an attorney assisting the family with estate matters, and asked very calmly whether a new account had been opened under the family trust in the last 6 months. Tom Alvarez, the branch manager, went quiet in that particular way bank employees go quiet when they're deciding how much they're allowed to say. "Ma'am, I can't discuss account specifics without documentation showing your authority," he said. "But I can tell you, and I probably shouldn't, that we filed something with our compliance department in February. I can't say more than that. That's not nothing. In banking, we filed something with compliance is a sentence with weight behind it. It usually means a suspicious activity report, a SAR, filed with FinCEN, the Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit, triggered by a pattern the bank's own systems flagged as irregular. Banks don't tell customers when they file a SAR. Tom hadn't told me one had been filed, but he'd told me enough, and I'd read enough SARs and title work to know what filed something with compliance sounds like when a bank employee is trying not to say a word they're not legally allowed to say. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 11 minutes before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to drive. I didn't tell Caleb that night. I want to be honest about that too, because it wasn't strategy, it was fear. I knew knew what would happen. I'd seen it happen before, in smaller ways, over 3 years of marriage. Any criticism of Ruth got absorbed by Caleb like a stone dropped in wet sand. Not defended exactly, just swallowed, smoothed over. That's just Mom. She means well. You're reading into it. I tried anyway 2 nights later, over dishes, phrasing it as gently as I knew how. I think there might be. That's just Mom. She means well. You're reading into it. I tried anyway 2 nights later, over dishes, phrasing it as gently as I knew how. I think there might be something off with your mom's power of attorney over your dad, I said. The signature looks different. It was signed while he was in the hospital. Caleb didn't even look up from the pan he was scrubbing. She's been handling Dad's stuff for years. He trusts her completely. That's not what I asked. What are you asking then? I'm asking you to look at it with me. Just look. He set the pan down harder than he needed to. You've been a lawyer for 6 months, and suddenly everyone's committing fraud? Maren, that's my mother. I know she's your mother. Then let it go. I didn't let it go. But I stopped bringing it to Caleb because I understood in that conversation that I was going to have to build a case strong enough that he couldn't argue with it, not one built on a strange signature and a bank employee's careful non-answer. I was going to need something undeniable, something with numbers. So I did what I'd been trained to do when a situation is bigger than what's in front of you. I stopped reacting and started documenting. The second thing I found was the LLC. It was buried in a stack of documents Ruth had accidentally left in a folder at our house after Easter. She was disorganized in a way I'd started to suspect was strategic, scattering paper across enough surfaces that no one person ever saw the whole picture. Among grocery lists and a church bulletin was a Secretary of State filing confirmation for something called Hale Family Holdings LLC, registered the same month Ruth had gifted us the house. I looked it up that night on the state's business registry. Sole member, Ruth Hale. Registered agent, a P.O. box 40 minutes from her house, not her home address. Filed 2 weeks before she signed the deed over to Caleb. I stared at my laptop for a long time. A gift with no strings, on paper, but gifted the same month she quietly set up an LLC with no visible business purpose. Title attorneys learned to smell a structure built to move something out of reach. A lawsuit, a debt, a divorce, a future estate dispute. I didn't know yet what Ruth was hiding the house from. I only knew she was hiding it from something. I hired David Okafor the following week. I'd worked opposite him on a commercial closing 2 years earlier. He was a CPA and a certified fraud examiner, the kind of forensic accountant who spoke about spreadsheets the way other people talk about crime scenes. I paid him out of my own account, told no one, and gave him everything I had. The account statements with the cutoff numbers, the LLC filing, the power of attorney. He called me 8 days later, and I could hear it in his voice before he said a word. That specific, careful, calm accountants use when they found something that isn't a mistake. Maren, I want to walk you through this slowly, he said, because it's not one transaction. It's a pattern. Between November and February, $41,000 had moved out of the Hale Family Trust in 19 separate withdrawals, every single one between $9,000 and $9,500, under $10,000. Every time. Federal reporting requirements kick in automatically at $10,000. Structuring transactions specifically to stay under that threshold has its own name and its own federal statute, 31 U.S.C., paragraph 5324. It doesn't matter if the underlying money is legitimately yours. Splitting it up to dodge the reporting trigger is a crime by itself. That's not carelessness, David said. That's someone who knows exactly where the line is and is stepping around it on purpose. $41,000 from the trust, and that was only the money that moved through accounts David could see. The Sarasota account Ruth had blurted out at the birthday table, the one that made my father-in-law's face go white, wasn't even on David's radar yet. That came later when Nathan showed up with his own decade-old bank records and a name on an old joint account that had never been closed, only forgotten. I sat with David's numbers for 2 days before I did anything. My hands didn't shake this time. They went very, very still, which I've learned is worse. I tried once more to fix this quietly because some stubborn part of me still believed Ruth could be reasoned with if she understood I wasn't a threat, only a person who wanted her father-in-law protected. I asked her to coffee. Neutral ground, a diner off Route 9 with bad lighting and good pie, the kind of place where nobody raises their voice. I found some things reviewing Gerald's estate paperwork, I told her, keeping my voice level, keeping my hands flat on the table the way I'd been trained to keep them when de-escalating a scared patient. I think there might be some irregularities. I want to help you fix them before anyone else has to know. Ruth's face did something remarkable. It softened. Briefly, genuinely, and then it hardened into something I hadn't seen before. Not in 3 years of holidays and birthdays, and her particular brand of performative warmth. You think you understand this family after 3 years? She said quietly. You don't. Gerald's mind isn't what it was, and someone has to protect what's his before the wrong people take advantage of that. The wrong people. I repeated. His accountant, his so-called friends at the club. People circle a man like Gerald once they smell money coming loose. She said it so smoothly I almost believed she believed it. I am protecting this family. By forging his signature, the softness vanished entirely. You have no proof of that. I have his signature from 400 documents over 30 years, and I have the one he supposedly signed in a hospital bed that doesn't match a single one of them, I said. I have a forensic accountant's report showing 19 withdrawals structured to stay under $10,000. I have an LLC you registered 2 weeks before you gave us a house with no strings, which tells me you were hiding that house from something. I don't know what yet, but I will. Ruth's jaw tightened. For 1 second, I saw the calculation happen behind her eyes, the same calculation I'd watch her make later, at the birthday table, right before she stood up. Fight or fold. She chose neither. She chose escalation. If you push this, she said, low and even, Caleb will have to choose. And you should think very carefully about which side of that choice you want to be standing on when your son is old enough to ask why his father doesn't speak to his grandmother anymore. I paid for the pie. I didn't finish mine. 9 days later, she handed my 6-year-old an eviction notice at his own birthday party and told him to read it out loud. I understand now that it wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was a counter move. She'd felt the walls closing, and she'd reached for the only leverage she had left: public humiliation, in front of the whole family. Time to make me look unstable and vindictive right as I was building a case that made her look like a thief. If I'd reacted the way she expected, screamed, cried, stormed out, I'd have handed her exactly the story she needed: the outsider wife, unhinged, attacking a sweet grandmother over a birthday cake. I didn't scream. I'd learned a long time ago, in places louder and more dangerous than a dining room, that the person who stays calm is the one people believe. After Nathan's folder hit the table, the dinner party became something else entirely. Not a party anymore, just 40 people standing very still in a room that smelled like buttercream and shame. My father-in-law read through the pages Nathan had brought. Old bank statements. A letter from 2016, where Ruth had written, in her own hand, that Nathan's share had been reallocated for the good of the family. And I watched something in him break and reassemble at the same time. Grief and clarity rarely arrive separately. Ruth, he said, I need you to tell me the truth, right now, in front of everyone, since you're so fond of doing things in front of everyone. Ruth's mouth was a thin line. You're going to believe him over me, after everything I've done for this family. I'm going to believe the bank statements, Gerald said. His voice had steadied, gone somewhere quiet and final, because bank statements don't have a reason to lie to me. I stepped in then, because I could feel the room wanting to dissolve into shouting, and shouting is exactly what makes people forget what actually happened. I think everyone should go home, I said. Not because this isn't real, because what happens next needs to happen with lawyers and detectives, not with 40 witnesses and a sheet cake. Ruth's sister actually laughed, one short disbelieving bark. Detectives? Structuring transactions to avoid federal reporting is a federal crime, I said. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult is a state crime in this state, with its own statute. I'm not saying that to threaten anyone. I'm saying it because it's true, and because in about 10 minutes I'm going to call someone whose job it is to determine whether it applies here. Caleb finally looked at me, really looked, the way he hadn't in weeks. You already have someone. I have someone, I confirmed. Her name was Detective Renata Cho, and I'd gotten her name from David Okafor, who'd worked with her financial crimes unit twice before on cases that involved structured withdrawals. I'd called her 3 days earlier, laid out what I had, and she'd told me, in the flat, unhurried voice of someone who has heard every version of this story, that if what I was describing held up, it wasn't a family matter anymore. It was hers. I called her from the hallway of Ruth's house at 8:41 p.m., cake frosting still on my fingers, my son's small hand wrapped around mine because he refused to let go of me for the rest of the night. Detective Cho picked up on the second ring. It escalated, I told her. She just handed my 6-year-old an eviction notice in front of 40 relatives, and my brother-in-law showed up with a decade-old copy of the same scheme. There was a pause, the sound of a pen against paper. Okay, don't let anyone leave with financial documents in hand if you can help it. Anything Nathan brought, anything Ruth still has access to. I'll be there in 20 minutes with a patrol unit, just to keep the peace. Not to make an arrest tonight. This kind of case takes documentation, not drama. I need the paper trail intact before anyone gets a chance to shred it. She was right about the shredding. 20 minutes is exactly how long it took Ruth to disappear into the kitchen for water and come back a shade paler, her phone tucked quickly into her cardigan pocket. Detective Cho arrived at 9:03 p.m., 17 years on the force by her own account, 6 of them in the financial crimes unit. A woman with the unhurried economy of movement that comes from having done this exact walk into exact rooms like this one many times before. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply asked Ruth politely whether she'd be willing to answer some questions and informed her, because she was required to, that she wasn't under arrest and didn't have to say anything at all. Ruth said nothing at all. Her attorney would arrive by morning. What happened over the following 11 days was not the dramatic, single-scene reckoning television makes fraud look like. It was slower and in its own way, more brutal. Priya Nandan, and way, more brutal. Priya Nandan, an estate and elder law attorney I retained on David's recommendation, filed an emergency petition the next morning, not against Ruth directly, but on Gerald's behalf, requesting the court suspend the power of attorney pending a capacity evaluation and a formal accounting of trust assets. Priya was precise in a way I found enormously comforting. She spoke about Exhibit A and Exhibit B the way other people talk about grocery lists, and she moved through the emergency filing with the calm speed of someone who had done this 100 times and lost patience for anyone who hadn't. The capacity question matters enormously, she told me over the phone the day after the party. If Gerald lacked capacity when he signed that POA, it's void from the start, and everything Ruth did under it becomes financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, not just a family dispute over money. That's a different statute entirely, with real teeth. Denise Marsh, a caseworker with Adult Protective Services, came to interview Gerald 2 days later. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't allowed to be, and I understood why. But Priya told me afterward that Denise's report noted mild cognitive impairment consistent with early-stage vascular dementia, and, more damning, noted that Gerald had no memory of signing the power of attorney at all, didn't want to talk about it, no memory of the document existing. He asked me twice during the interview what the date was, Denise told Priya, who relayed it to me carefully, the way you hand someone something breakable. And he got frustrated with himself for not remembering. That frustration, that self-awareness of the gap, that's actually significant. It suggests he knew something was being taken from him even if he couldn't name what. I cried in my car after that phone call, not for Ruth. For Gerald, who had spent decades building something steady, and for the particular cruelty of being robbed by someone counting on the exact moment you'd be least able to notice. The bank froze the trust account on day 6. Once Detective Cho formally requested it as part of the active investigation, an asset preservation order, not a criminal charge yet, but enough to stop the bleeding. That was the moment Ruth understood this had stopped being something she could talk her way out of. We found out later, from David's continued digging and from records Detective Cho was able to subpoena, that Ruth had been trying to move the remaining balance out of the Sarasota account. In the 72 hours between the birthday party and the freeze, a wire transfer initiated the morning after the party for the full remaining balance to an account in her sister's name. It bounced back undelivered on day 4. The receiving bank flagged it for review before Ruth's asset freeze even went through, an accident of timing that Detective Cho later called the kind of luck that doesn't happen twice, so I hope she wasn't counting on it. She was. That was the crisis, the part where everything narrowed down to hours instead of days. Priya called me at 7:14 a.m. on the 7th day, her voice tighter than I'd heard it. The freeze on the trust account goes through this afternoon, but the Sarasota account isn't part of the trust. It's personal, which means it's outside our petition's reach unless Detective Cho can get a criminal hold on it fast. If that wire had cleared, we'd likely never see that money again. We have maybe until end of business today before Ruth tries again through a different bank. I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, Eli eating cereal at the table, utterly unaware that $40,000 and his grandfather's dignity were balanced on a single business day. I remember thinking, with the strange clarity that comes back to you from training you thought you'd never use again, this is a timeline problem, not an emotional one. Timeline problems have solutions. You just have to move faster than the thing you're chasing. I called Detective Cho. She called an assistant district attorney. The ADA called a judge. By 2 p.m., a criminal seizure warrant had been issued for the Sarasota account, faxed to the receiving bank an hour and 40 minutes before Ruth, according to bank records later entered as evidence, attempted the transfer a second time from a different device. She was too late by 80 minutes. I don't know exactly what those 80 minutes felt like from Ruth's side of it. I know what they felt like from mine. My hands cold around a mug of coffee that went untouched for 3 hours, watching my phone, waiting for Priya's text to tell me whether we'd made it. Frozen, both accounts. We got there in time. I sat down on my kitchen floor and put my head against the cabinet and didn't move for a while. The formal consequences unspooled over the following weeks, less like a single explosion and more like a slow-motion collapse of every wall Ruth had built to hold her story up. She was charged with structuring financial transactions under federal law, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult under the state elder abuse statute, and forgery tied specifically to the power of attorney David and Priya had proven, through a forensic handwriting comparison, did not match 30 years of Gerald's verified signature. The handwriting examiner's report ran to 11 pages and concluded, in language far drier than the moment deserved, that the questioned signature showed significant inconsistencies in stroke pressure, letter formation, and pen lift patterns inconsistent with the known exemplar set, suggesting an 85% or greater probability the signature was not produced by the same writer. Nathan's decade-old case became part of a broader pattern the prosecution used to establish intent, not a separate charge, since the statute of limitations had run on his original loss, but powerful context for a jury or a judge trying to understand that this wasn't a single lapse in judgment. It was a method Ruth had used before and simply simply refined. Ruth's husband, my father-in-law, filed for legal separation the same month the charges were filed, not out of cruelty, Priya told me, but because his own attorney advised it might be the cleanest way to protect what remained of his assets and formally, legally, put daylight between himself and whatever came next for Ruth. He moved into a condo near Nathan's old apartment complex. Oddly, a coincidence Nathan found darkly funny in a way that told me he was starting, slowly, to let himself feel things about his father again that weren't only grief. Caleb changed the most and the slowest. For 2 weeks after the party, he barely spoke to me, caught in some private negotiation with the version of his mother he'd spent 38 years believing in. Then Denise Marsh's report reached him through Priya, laying out in clinical language exactly what mild cognitive impairment and no memory of signing meant for his father. I watched him read it at our kitchen table, watched his face do the same collapse and reassemble his father's had done at the birthday party. I should have looked when you asked me to look, he said that night. Just that. It wasn't an elaborate apology. It didn't need to be. Some sentences carry their whole weight in 6 words. You're looking now? I said. Ruth ultimately accepted a plea agreement rather than face trial. No contest to the forgery charge and 1 count of structuring, in exchange for the prosecutor dropping the broader exploitation charge, contingent on full restitution and 5 years of probation with financial monitoring, meaning a court-appointed auditor would review any account she held for the length of her sentence. She avoided prison. She did not avoid the county courthouse's public docket, or the fact that $31,000 of the missing $41,000 was eventually recovered and returned to Gerald's trust, the Sarasota account's frozen balance restored in full once the criminal hold cleared. She did not attend the hearing where the judge read the restitution order aloud. Gerald did. So did Nathan. So did Caleb, sitting between his father and his brother for the first time in 8 years, the 3 of them in a row like something rebuilt instead of something broken. I want to be honest about the parts that didn't heal cleanly, because a story that ties every thread by the epilogue isn't quite telling the truth. Ruth still calls Caleb sometimes. He answers briefly, mostly logistics. A birthday, a doctor's appointment for his father that she somehow still wants updates on despite everything. He doesn't tell her where we live now. We moved 8 months after the party, a smaller house across town, not because the old one wasn't legally ours. Priya made certain of that, and certain the eviction notice Ruth handed our son had never been worth the paper it was printed on, a threat with no legal standing behind it since the deed truly had no reversion clause, exactly as I'd told Ruth over that cake. But because I didn't want my son's birthdays happening under a roof that still remembered that night. Gerald lives independently for now, with a court-appointed financial monitor reviewing his accounts quarterly, and a home health aide who comes twice a week, more for company than necessity. His memory has stabilized somewhat. Denise told us that once the acute stress of the exploitation resolved, some of what had looked like decline actually eased, which broke my heart in a new direction entirely. How much of his confusion had been the slow erosion of being lied to by someone he trusted completely, rather than his mind alone failing him. Nathan and Caleb talk every week now. Nathan came for Eli's next birthday, a quiet one, 4 kids, a backyard, no cakeside ambushes, and stood next to his brother by the grill the way I imagine they must have stood 100 times as boys, before whatever Ruth built between them had time to calcify into 8 years of silence. Or whatever Ruth built between them had time to calcify into 8 years of silence. I went back to work 3 days after the plea hearing, because closings don't stop for anyone's family crisis, and because there is something steadying about deeds and titles, records that simply say what is true and stay that way. I think that's part of why this whole ordeal broke something loose in me that I needed broken loose. I'd spent years believing that competence meant staying quiet and letting things resolve themselves. The Army taught me the opposite once, a long time ago, and somewhere between deployments and dinner parties, I'd let myself forget it. Silence doesn't protect anyone. Documentation does. Timing does. The willingness to make one phone call before you're sure you're ready to make it. Eli is 7 now. He doesn't remember most of that birthday. Kids that age rarely hold on to the specifics. Thankfully, though he does remember, in the vague way children remember weather, that Grandma Ruth isn't around as much, and that his dad got really quiet for a while and then not quiet anymore. Small mercies. A few weeks ago, cleaning out a drawer, I found the folded eviction notice, the actual paper Ruth had slid across the cake that night. I don't know why I'd kept it. Evidence habit, maybe. The same instinct that made me photograph every account statement before Ruth had the chance to misplace the originals. Eli was on the floor nearby, sorting his baseball cards, and he glanced up at the paper in my hands. "What's that one?" I almost lied. Almost said, "Nothing, bud." Folded it back into the drawer. Let it stay buried the way I'd let it stay buried for months. Instead, I sat down on the floor next to him. "It's a piece of paper someone gave me a long time ago to try to scare me out of our house," I said. It didn't work. He considered this with the total, unblinking seriousness only a 7-year-old can produce. "Because you're a lawyer? Because I read things all the way to the end before I decide how scared to be." I said. That's the whole trick. Most people who want to scare you are counting on you not finishing the sentence. He nodded like that was obvious, the way kids do when you accidentally hand them something true, then went back to sorting cards by team. I put the eviction notice in the recycling that afternoon. Not the shredder. I didn't need to protect anyone from it anymore. And there's a particular satisfaction in letting a threat end up exactly where junk mail ends up. Unremarkable, disposed of on a Tuesday between a pizza flyer and a grocery circular. Ruth handed my son a piece of paper and told him it meant he had to leave the only home he'd ever known. She was wrong about the paper. She was wrong about the house. And in the end, she was wrong about the person she thought she was handing it to. She looked at a soldier who'd become a lawyer and saw a filing clerk who wouldn't read past page 1.